The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on this side of the House actually have a plan for a prosperous economic future for this country. The Conservatives, who continue to deny the existence of climate change, have a plan that leads backwards, not forwards. We are ensuring that things like the $12 billion Dow plant in Alberta is getting built, the $7 billion Jansen potash mine, electric vehicle and battery plants, hydrogen facilities in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador. We have a plan for a future that is a great and prosperous future. They have no plan.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
Here are the consequences of the NDP Liberal plan. A new report shows that 35% of Alberta families are skipping meals because of high food costs. And yet, the Liberals and NDP tell Canadians they've never had it so good. But I'd like to remind the Prime Minister that his own parliamentary budget officer confirmed that Canadians are worse off paying the carbon tax. In fact, when the NDP Liberals quadruple the carbon tax, it will cost Alberta families $2,000 a year. Will the NDP Liberals just finally admit their carbon tax is a scam and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we continue to fight for Canadian families. How do we do that, Mr. Speaker? One way is the Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker. Families with children under the age of 6 can receive almost $7,800 each and every year per child, Mr. Speaker. This is tangible support that arrives each and every month to help families afford the basics or whatever their child needs. This is how we fight on this side for Canadian families, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
I'd like to give the Minister some actual facts of what real Canadian families are facing. Fact, 35% of Alberta families are skipping meals because of high food costs. Fact, food bank usage in Mississauga is up 60%. Fact, doctors are warning about scurvy because Canadians can't afford nutritious food. Fact, food inflation in Canada is 37% higher than the United States. Fact, their own parliamentary budget officer admitted and confirmed the carbon tax is all pain, no gain. Fact, the NDP Liberal government can end the pain they're inflicting on Canadians if they call a carbon tax election. Will they do it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, cutting a check that low-income Canadians are getting, the vast majority of them, over 80%, are getting more than they pay, is not going to fix an issue like scurvy. What's going to fix scurvy is certainly not cutting our health system. It's not getting rid of diabetes medication or getting rid of free dental care. It's not attacking the foundations of our health system, just as we're working with provinces and territories on solutions. Mr. Speaker, what is going to get it done in a time of global uncertainty is collaboration and working together, not nonsense slogans.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Chemin-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the numbers speak for themselves. A September survey from the Quebec Association of Real Estate Brokers shows that the median price of a single-family home in Quebec has reached $450,000, an increase of 74% in 5 years. First-time homebuyers now face an additional monthly expense of $1,055. In Saguenay, the purchase price has risen by $130,000, making home ownership even more difficult. What does the Bloc Liberal Coalition intend to do to help Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Mr. Speaker, the question is very interesting. The member knows that we're investing to build affordable housing in Quebec and across the country. In Quebec, we're investing more than $9 million to build houses. It's interesting because the Conservative were against this program to build housing. When the Conservative leader was housing minister, he only built 6 housing units across our country, and this is unacceptable. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Chemin-Lévis. Once again, the figures are alarming. In Trois-Rivières, the price of a single-family home has risen by $190,050. In Drummondville, it's an increase of $204,000. And that's not counting the other costs associated with owning a home. These increases testify to a growing crisis that merits urgent action. In concrete terms, what does the Bloc Liberal Coalition intend to do? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a coincidence that the Conservative leader is here today because I'd like to ask him to help me. Across Quebec, including in my colleague's riding, we'd like to find the 6 affordable housing units that the leader built across this country during his term. We still haven't found them. Could he come with me to Quebec to find them? The Honourable Member for Drummond. Recent events at Montreal's Bedford School remind us that it would be a serious mistake to take secularism for granted. On the contrary, we need to do even more. In Quebec, we're witnessing a return of religion in our schools after decades of fighting to keep it out. Gender equality, the separation of religion and state, is at the heart of Quebec's integration model, and it must be protected at all times, systematically, relentlessly. Can the government now pledge not to challenge Bill 21 at the Supreme Court? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, there are Bloc members that confuses the Quebec's government's responsibility with that of Canada's. We are not responsible for education. Perhaps the Bloc would like it to be, but it's not the Canadian government's responsible. If my colleague wishes it, I would ask him to seek a seat at the National Assembly of Quebec. The Honourable Member for Drummond. One day we will get there, Mr. Speaker. But I'd like to remind this House that it offers every day before it begins its work. I'd like to remind you that this government continues to maintain a religious exception in the criminal code for calls to violence, even murder. And this is very serious. I'd like to remind you that the Prime Minister appointed a representative who spends her time accusing Quebec's Bill 21 of every evil. And we're just growing further and further away from secularism. Will this government listen to reason and restrain its irresistible urge to weaken the Quebec model of secularism? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague talks about urge. Well, if he does have an urge to talk about Quebec's responsibilities, we'd ask him to at the next elections to run for a seat at the Quebec National Assembly. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Usually I have respect for my colleague, but he's not even listening to my question and he's just saying anything. Quebec has chosen an integration model based on common values, gender equality, separation of religion and state, and our historical heritage. Ottawa can choose the opposite model, multiculturalism, which basically tells people they don't have to change anything. They don't have to integrate. And they say, well, it's no big deal. The federal integration model is contrary to that of Quebec's. When will this government or the next government understand that multiculturalism doesn't work in Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite all of these efforts, I find it hard to answer a question that is on provincial jurisdiction.
From Regina Capel.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians are worse off. The effects of his deficits, his inflation, and his carbon tax hikes have been devastating. A new report by the Angus Reid Institute says that a majority of Canadians are struggling just to be able to buy food. And of course, that's even worse for low-income households, with 2/3 of those Canadians saying they can't even afford to feed their families. Yeah. One way to lower food prices would be to axe the carbon tax on the farmer who grows the food, the trucker who ships the food, and the grocer who sells the food. The Prime Minister could do that today. Yeah. Will he show some compassion, lower food prices, and just axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day we see the Conservatives get up in this House and tell mistruths. 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back than they pay in the price on pollution. Of course, it is no surprise when you hear what their closest friends and allies have to say. Danielle Smith believes planes are spraying chemtrails. Jess Crosby says climate change is bogus. And John Rustad says fighting climate change is a plot to reduce the human population and force people to eat bugs. Mr. Speaker, they say you can tell a lot about people from the company they keep. Well, Mr. Speaker, you certainly can.
Although the Honourable Minister did not make reference to a particular member, I encourage all members, please, to skate further away from the line, especially in regards to using that word. The Honourable Member. The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
Obviously, the carbon tax scheme isn't making Canadians better off. Otherwise, 2/3 of low-income Canadians wouldn't be reporting that they can't afford to pay for groceries, and they wouldn't be lining up at food banks or waiting hours to get rejected potatoes. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, the government's own watchdog, has concluded that when you factor in all the costs of the carbon tax, and remember, Canadians don't get to pick and choose which costs they pay, when you factor it all in, after they're done quadrupling the carbon tax, a family in Ontario will be $1,400 poorer. New Brunswick, $1,000 poorer. Saskatchewan, $2,000 poorer. So why not let the people decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, the Parliamentary Budget Officer and 300 economists across this country have said that 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back, and it works directly inverse to income. By taking away the price on pollution, you will actually make the most vulnerable more vulnerable. The Leader of the Opposition and his caucus know that, but certainly...
The Chair is having some difficulty hearing the answer of the Honourable Member. I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister, to start from the top. I'm going to ask all members, please, I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Foothills, please, to not speak when not recognized by the Chair. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But we know that the Conservative Party of Canada actually doesn't believe in the reality of climate change, nor do they have a plan for the economic future. They are no different from Mr. Rustad, who has endorsed the Leader of the Opposition, who says we should not be trying to fight climate change. The narrative about climate I can only put to the fact that somehow they think we need to reduce the world population. And many other candidates have essentially said we do not need to fight climate change. Well, Canadians know that climate change is real. Canadians know you need a plan for the future of the economy, and that is what is on this side of the House. Shame on you.